You know, when you've gone through a crappy relationship and have come out the other end feeling so effing relieved that you're finally out, and when you look back, you can see all of the red and amber flags that you overlooked at the time? Well, I think going on a GLP-1 weight loss journey can be like that. It can be strewn with warning flags, and if you don't know where to look and head, then it could mean a rocky road. If you happen to identify many of the big issues as you travel, you'll have a smoother journey. Today I talked to Lorrie, who I think found many of those flags, possibly accidentally, but she did. And as a result, she's had a successful journey. I know she says she was lucky, but I'm not sure that luck had much to do with it. I've got this favourite quote that I really like. It says that life can only be understood by looking backwards, but it must be lived going forwards. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look backwards in order to more so understand what's happening when we go forwards. Hi, I'm Bern, and you're listening to Investigating Ozempic. This week, we're going to look back in time to some of the very early GLP-1 drugs. And there are similarities with those drugs to what we're using today. They belong to the same drug class, which is GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, but they have differences, and it's mostly got to do with longevity. Unless you're a medical professional or a diabetic type 2, you probably haven't heard of Byetta, or its chemical name, exenatide. It's a diabetic drug used to treat type 2 diabetes. It's a twice-daily injection, and it's also an early GLP-1. It was approved in 2007 in the USA and then discontinued in 2022. The drug only lasted 2.4 hours, so that's possibly why you didn't see celebs using it and girls dancing around on TikTok while they inject themselves. I guess the short lifespan of the drug isn't appealing. Skip forward a few years, and with the help of the saliva from a lizard found mostly around Arizona and Mexico that only eats twice a year, called the Gila monster, which is named after the Gila River, where it is mostly found, we now have a GLP-1 called Liraglutide. This Liraglutide lasts between 13 to 15 hours in the body. Like Ozempic and Wegovy, Saxenda is prescribed in a higher dosage than Victoza. Saxenda is for weight loss, and Victoza is for type 2 diabetes. Now, both of these drugs are made by Novo Nordisk, and the side effects of liraglutide are very similar to semaglutide. Semaglutide is the GLP-1 that you find in Ozempic and Wegovy. The most common side effects of Saxenda include nausea, diarrhea, constipation, vomiting, injection site reaction, low blood sugar, headache, an upset stomach, tiredness, dizziness, stomach pain, fever, and gastroenteritis. The other possible side effects of Saxenda are pancreatitis, gallbladder problems, increased heart rate, kidney problems, possibly allergic reactions, and possibly suicidal ideation. I think most of these side effects are found in semaglutide as well. Saxenda is an injectable prescription medicine, the same as Wegovy and Ozempic. The very big difference between those two drugs is Saxenda and Victoza need to be injected daily. Wegovy and Ozempic are weekly. Even more important than that is that Saxenda, which is the weight loss version of liraglutide, comes in a higher dosage. It comes in a 3.0 milligram dosage, whereas Victoza, which is the diabetes drug, comes in a 1.8 maximum dosage. We're going to be coming back to these higher dosages for weight loss drugs again when we hit Ozempic and Wegovy. Just like Wegovy and Ozempic, Saxenda and Victoza have had a whole lot of clinical trials done on these drugs. The SCALE, SCALE, clinical trials for Saxenda, for liraglutide, evaluated the effectiveness of Saxenda in treating obesity by comparing it to placebo. Now, these clinical trials were paid for and held by Novo Nordisk. One other thing to realise that's pretty important is that in the clinical trials for liraglutide, the subjects were quite different in the diabetes trial compared to the weight loss trial. So in the diabetes trial, for Victoza, the average weight of a subject was 89 kilos. And in the weight loss or the Saxenda trials, the average weight of a person was 106.2 kilos. So that is just over 17 kilos difference. Now, the reason that's important is because if you've got one person weighing 100 kilos and one person weighing 117 kilos, say, the person who weighs 117 kilos usually loses weight at a faster rate than the one weighing 100 kilos. If you want to see a higher amount of weight loss show up in a clinical trial, then use heavier people. I took a look at a trial from 2011. The title of the trial is called The Effect of Liraglutide on Body Weight in Non-Diabetic Obese Subjects or Overweight Subjects with Comorbidities. SCALE. That's the trademark name of the trial. And it was a large trial. It had 3,731 people enrolled in it. It was a phase 3 trial. It went over 56 weeks, and some of the participants even went for 160 weeks. It was held in 190 sites in 27 countries, and it tested that 3.0 dosage that you find for the weight loss version of liraglutide, which is Saxenda. For the 3.0 dosage, with the people that had no pre-diabetes, the serious adverse events were 6.17%. For adverse events, it was 88.09 for that group. And then for the 3.0 milligram dosage for people that had pre-diabetes, the serious adverse events were 15.09% and the other adverse events were 88.06%. The common age of a participant in the trial was, they were 75% female and the age was 45 years old. The weight was approximately 105 kilos. According to the Australian Public Assessment Report on liraglutide, there were 10 subjects that suffered from pancreatitis in that trial, and 191 people withdrew who were on liraglutide, mostly due to adverse events, and most of those adverse events were gastrointestinal. So you can see that there's an awful lot of adverse events, and it also stated in the public assessment report that there were a number of adverse events seen in the liraglutide 3 milligram group in this application that occurred at a higher rate than the placebo group. These included pancreatitis and gallbladder disease. For this trial, which was paid for by Novo Nordisk, there was diet and exercise counselling. So it said standardised dietary and exercise counselling was provided in individual or group sessions up to week 68. Now, I don't know anyone that can have a diet counsellor for 68 weeks. That sounds awfully expensive. But patients were advised to increase their physical activity to at least 150 minutes per week and to reduce their daily energy intake to 500 calories below their individualized energy requirements based on World Health Organization estimates. So they had a counsellor, they were told to exercise 150 minutes, and they were put on a diet of 500 calories below a particular number. So yeah, you got to wonder how much is the diet and how much is the drug. The last thing I want to draw your attention to is another study on liraglutide. It was done in Korea, and it was done in 2022. It's a real-world study, which means that what they did is they used 2 university hospitals in Korea, and they monitored all the patients that had liraglutide between 2014 and 2019, and they found out that only 40% of the patients remained on liraglutide for 6 months or more. So that's a real world study. Now, people stop this drug for all different reasons. I think a real world study that isn't paid for by Novo Nordisk is something to look at. So I've attached it in the show notes. I want to move on to Lorrie. Now, Lorrie is a mum from Perth. She's got 7 kids, and I interviewed her about her choice of using Saxenda over Ozempic. And once you listen to the interview, you'll hear why. But I think Lorrie was really smart in how she used this drug, and her weight loss journey was successful as a result. Lorrie faced many challenges when taking a GLP-1 drug. Firstly, she's a woman, and GLP-1s are slightly different for women than men. I don't think many people know that, and we will go into that further in upcoming episodes. Secondly, she was given a strict dosage schedule. And thirdly, she wasn't told how to get off the drug. So we're going to have a look at all of these 3 important jigsaw pieces in more detail in the following episode. But today, sit back and have a listen to Lorrie's successful story. Thanks for coming along, Lorrie. You have experience with Saxenda, which is a
Correct.
GLP-1. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you want to tell me when you started that, why you started it, and what were the effects for you?
Absolutely. So I first started the injection, it was June 2022. So it's been sort of almost 2.5 years since that first nervous jab.
Yeah, I get that.
I think like a lot of people, I'd never been obese before, but I'd, been like a lot of women. I've got 7 kids. So there's sort of up and down.
7 kids.
I do. I do have 7 kids.
I am actually one of 7 kids.
Yeah. Oh, look, big families aren't that common anymore, but yeah. So
They were
my
in my
eldest
day,
is 30 and my youngest is 12. So
wow.
I had the normal sort of up and down with weight, but I'd never, really sort of tipped over into that really unhealthy and difficult to shift weight until I had my hysterectomy in 2019. So I was in my sort of mid-40s.
Yep.
And it just sort of almost, it was like a switch got flipped.
Yeah.
And my weight just exponentially sort of increased, so quickly. And my control over my cravings for food, it was almost tidal. I just couldn't seem to get any sort of traction with stopping it. In the past, if I'd wanted to I'd just sort of tighten up my eating a bit and the weight would drop off, and it was nothing like that was working.
So was it like a lot of voice, a lot of, hearing like eat in your head, if that makes sense?
Beyond being hungry. Like I would eat until I was uncomfortable and still be grazing for food. My nutrition really was a mess, and I just wasn't really, I think, being able to identify like proper hunger cues anymore. So I would run on nothing but coffee until about 2:00 and then and then just not be able to stop.
Wow.
And as my weight increased, the health issues just started to pile on. So I've got some, disc disease and a couple of other spinal issues and the high blood pressure and the high cholesterol and all these sort
Yeah.
of other things. So the painkiller use got, greater and greater. And in the end, I was sort of living on, gabapentin and codeine and tapentadol and amitriptyline and all those kind of things. And I just went
Wow.
to my doctor and was like, I'm miserable. And he could see, he'd been my GP for years. So he knew that my weight was, increasing. And I think that's probably the good thing about having that good relationship. And he also knew of all my other health issues. So I didn't have to try and explain that or plead my case to anyone else.
Yeah.
And it was him that suggested originally Ozempic.
Yeah.
I had only really briefly heard about it at that time on, it was starting to make that ripple in the media, but not in a good way, just in that, that sort of weird, all the overweight people are sort of taking, and so I didn't know anything about Saxenda, and that's really all I knew, and I hadn't actually thought about the injection.
So the difference, obviously, with Ozempic and Saxenda is they're both GLP-1s, but they're different GLP-1s. So Saxenda's a liraglutide and Ozempic's a semaglutide. And Ozempic, you inject once a week, and Saxenda, you inject once a day.
It is a daily jab. So, and I hadn't even heard of it. So he had sort of only really sort of touched on Ozempic initially. He's like, before we prescribe anything, he wanted to do some baseline blood tests for me to make sure that obviously, things like my, pancreas was okay and all those sort of biochemistry markers were doing what they were supposed to do and that there wasn't anything too major. So he said, look, you can go ahead, but he did warn me, and it was right at that sort of real crux of the shortage. I can write you the script for Ozempic, but there's no guarantees you'll be able to source it. And even if you do, there's no guarantee you'll be able to source it reliably from script to script. So
is that why you went to Saxenda?
Well, he just said the other option is this. He said it works in a similar way, but it's a short acting rather than the long acting, and it is a daily jab. And I sort of, in the end, I thought, like, I don't want to start something that I can't guarantee I'm going to be able to get from, reliably. And so that's the one I went with.
Okay. Yeah.
And then
cool.
it sat in my fridge for about 2 weeks while I had a crisis of confidence about the whole thing.
Oh, and why were you hesitating?
While I was waiting for my blood results to come back, I did what a lot of people I think do, and that is join a couple of the online support groups. And they are both a wonderful source of support and information and real patient experience, real people experience outside of the sort of the data and the clinical trials, but they're also a bit of sometimes an echo chamber of terrible side effects and all the worst case scenarios. So I did have, all of that ringing in my ears a little bit before I took the plunge.
So tell me about the first time that you took your injection and what was the effect on yourself?
So I finally, the very first jab, I'd sort of decided, look, I already feel like crap. My health is a dumpster fire. So and I figured since it is the short acting, at least if there are sort of terrible side effects, I sort of got all the things together I thought I might need, every anti-nausea product and anti-diarrheal product and anti-constipation product. And I had this arsenal, like a pharmacopoeia of side effect things ready to go.
That's so funny.
And didn't need any of them because actually the only thing that happened, I didn't get a huge reduction in like actual hunger. So I almost noticed with the very first jab is the food noise. It was like someone hit the mute button. It was very weird.
Yeah.
And by that sort of third day, I wasn't sure what to do with the extra time in my head that I just wasn't chronically thinking about what I could eat next. It was quite a strange feeling, to be honest.
Yeah, that's a really common thing that I've heard. And I'm sure you've heard that on the forums that a lot of people say that.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems to be, I mean, obviously there's a real mixed bag of experiences there. And I think that seems to be the feeling that a lot of people are chasing and can be really disappointed if it takes a bit of extra time. But I was lucky in, I'm sure in all the things that you've read about it, you get those, I think they call them exceptional responders or strong responders to what is technically, loading or titration doses. And
Yeah.
I was lucky, I think, to be quite a strong responder.
Yeah.
But thankfully, without a lot of the side effects that do come along with it, a lot of people are, combating the nauseas and the GI issues and all of those things. I didn't really get anything like that. I think I had a bit of a dream run, to be honest. A bit of fatigue was probably by that first week I did notice. There
Yeah.
was a bit of that, and I think that's another common one, that sort of odd fatigue that sort of comes along. But again, because I had been in the groups for a little while, there was a lot of tips and sort of hints about how to combat that, which was, keep your water up, keep your protein up, get some vitamin B into you and things like that. And it did seem
Yeah.
to nip it in the bud quite quickly.
So you started on a low dose, obviously. For how long were you on that low dose?
Well, look, I initially, the first week, I was on that 0.6 milligrams, which is the across the board. That's the starting dose. That's the beginning of that titration schedule for Saxenda. And my doctor hadn't informed me about potentially going up slower. You probably know, obviously, the official titration schedule for
Yeah.
Saxenda is a weekly increase over that first month, until
Yes.
you're at 3 milligrams.
Yes, that's right.
But I did find I went up to the 1.2 as per instructed the following week, but the effects I was having were pretty profound, and I
Such
just sort of,
as?
well, the effects of the actual, I guess, the wanted sort of effects, the food noise muting, not
So
a
you were
total suppression of hunger, but being satiated with a more
yeah.
reasonable amount of food.
So you
Um,
were getting the results that you already wanted.
yeah,
So were you
yeah.
questioning in your head, well, why should I go up to this dose? And you were just doing it because your doctor had told you? Was that
Um,
your thought or?
from 0.6 to 1.2, I didn't question it too much. I sort of followed. But once I got to that 1.2, I was actually like, okay, the next increase is supposed to be next
Mm,
week to
yep.
1.8.
Yep.
And by that stage, the weight was really starting to drop off quite quickly. And
Yes. Yeah.
I kind of felt like, well, I'm not really sure how good it will be for my body to kind of keep pushing into the next sort of thing if this is really working well. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I sort of sat there for a little while.
Did you talk to your doctor about that, or
I did.
you made
He
that
did
decision?
check in with me. All the initial appointments were in his office, but he rang a couple of weeks in, just to touch base and do a telehealth and to see how things were going. And so I ran it by him then, like, um, how do you feel about taking a slower sort of journey through the dosing schedule, because it is working so well? And he was supportive. He said that is fine.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so I know that's not always the case for people, but he just said, look, there's no point if you're getting the effect. It's not like an antibiotic where there is a certain dose that you need.
Yeah, you were getting the result that you wanted.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
okay, and your side effects were fine at that stage, totally fine.
Yeah, I've never really had any GI side effects, per se, apart from that fatigue. The only probably other side effect that I did notice, was if you don't keep your water up. I think this could be the same with any of the GPL-1 medications, is they can be a bit drying, and I did find my eyes, and like even the inside of my mouth and stuff was a bit drier, so I had to use some drops for a while. But that's also a lovely side effect of menopause, so it was hard
Yeah,
to
that's
know
true.
which one of
I
those
know
was.
there is a study that I looked at, which is I think it was in Switzerland, where they correlated GLP-1 with people drinking less. So 36% people would drink 36% less liquid. It's kind of like you'll eat less food, but you'll also drink less. which
So yeah,
is
I mean, look, I
interesting.
was happy to drink water. I was drinking quite a bit of water, but I seem to need a lot more to really feel hydrated
Oh,
than I had
wow.
previously on when I was having before starting the injection. And and the other thing I found, if I really didn't keep my water up, that the constipation did start to creep in, and
Yep.
so that I think water is pretty critical.
Yep. So how long were you on it in total? And what did you get up to? Did you increase your dose at any point, or what did you end up
Well,
on?
look, obviously, as you know, the technical therapeutic dose of Saxenda is for weight loss is 3 milligrams. I
Yeah,
never
I
got
think they.
past 1.8.
Yeah. Do you find
So
that what do you think about that? I think they call it a maintenance dose.
yeah, I mean, obviously, the original medication was in that Victoza format, which is obviously the same medication, but it's
That's
for
right.
glycemic control, and the glycemic control dose is 1.8, and so those particular pens only dose to that 1.8. Um, I'm not really sure. I've got to say that I totally buy into. I know that that's where all the studies were done, and that's where the trial data lies. So that has to be considered. But I think and I know anecdotes are not science, but spending enough time, and I've been in these groups now for a couple of years. It seems that a lot of people anyway find that they still get quite good results at those mid-range doses, or
Yep.
certainly they don't need to get there in a 5-week period. Some people kind of
Yep.
meander up and they're getting good results and almost reaching their goal, and they don't. It might take them months to get there. And
Yep.
I was lucky. 1.8 seemed to be the highest I needed to go. And
With your pen that you had for Saxenda,
mm,
if you stay on that 1.8 dose,
mm,
does your pen last longer because you're
yeah,
using less, or
absolutely. I
does
mean,
do you remember how long you used your pens for, and did your doctor give you any advice on that, or?
obviously, I have a little bit of experience with medical maths through my I'm a vet nurse, retired now, to look
Yep.
after my children. But so I kind of always knew roughly how much was left in any pen, because there's 18 milligrams in each pen, and I would just divide the milligrams by the dose that I was on. So I kind of always knew roughly how much I was getting out of a pen. I mean, at the very most, a pen, if you're on the lowest dose, will last you 30 days because it's 0.6.
Yep.
So you can potentially get a month if you're staying on that low dose out of each pen. But if you
Yep.
are on the highest dose, each box, because it comes in a box of 5, is only going to last you the month.
And how much is the cost of Saxenda for a month?
At the time, the standard cost was about $387. There was something
Wow.
that they have recently just withdrawn called the Saxenda Care Program, which afforded people free boxes of the needle tips as part of the prescription when you signed up to Saxenda Care. But they have recently just stopped that program, so people are now also having to pay anywhere from about $15 to $22, depending on where you source your needle tips.
Yep. Have you noticed on the forum, because I know you're heavily involved with that, have you noticed people migrating from Saxenda onto Wegovy or Ozempic for weight loss?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's quite interesting, because when I first joined both groups, I watched the numbers sort of in the state of flux between the Ozempic groups and the Saxenda groups, because during the shortage, a lot of the Ozempic users were sort of, I guess, forced to try Saxenda. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, but now I've noticed that the engagement has dropped off quite a lot in the Saxenda groups, because now that Wegovy and Manjaro are more freely available, so they've definitely migrated away.
I think one of the things that Novo Nordisk, the manufacturer of that drug, have said is that they've claimed that you will
Mm,
have a higher percentage of body weight loss on semaglutide, which is the Wegovy drug, compared to Liraglutide, which is the Saxenda drug?
I lost 48% of my body weight on Saxenda,
Wow. That's huge, isn't it? And
which
over
is a
what period
lot.
of time?
So I started when I started in the June 2022. I'd reached a healthy weight range by the January, and that was about sort of a 20-kilo loss. And so that's when I started the weaning off process. I talked to my doctor, and he was quite happy, and I was very thankful actually that he wasn't a doctor that sort of went, oh, well, healthy BMI, that's it, the end, you're on your own.
Yep.
He sort of was quite happy to sort of for me to have that sort of weaning off period, as long as I continued to sort of check in and have some follow-up blood tests, and that those were all good, and start that weaning off process. So I did that weaning off over 10 months. So I stayed on it until the following November. So it'll be a year next week, actually, that I've been off the medication for 12 months.
And how have you found the food noise voices? How have you found that since?
I think having the benefit of being able to do that weaning off has really allowed me to and because it was over 10 months, it's quite a long time to drop. And look, I did do the click dosing. It is a really controversial thing in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
GLP
I've heard of
thing
it. Yeah.
about whether or not it is, and it's definitely not something that the manufacturers recommend with the pens.
That's right. Yeah, they don't
And I
recommend
do
it. Yeah.
no, and I do appreciate that. So that is, I guess, a personal decision that people.
So did you go
make.
low? What sort of dose you were click dosing, and you were going down lower than, say,
Yeah,
did you
so
go lower than 0.6 or?
I did
Yep.
ultimately. And then so it started off, I just shave a few clicks off and then
Yep.
sit there for a week, and
Yep.
then sort of monitor how my hunger felt. During that
Yep.
time, I'm not a calorie tracker. My past calorie counting experience, I have a pretty decent eyeballing ability with calories, but I it makes me sad to be really hyper
Yeah.
focusing on every calorie amount. I did also at the same time get a habit and food tracking, like more journaling style app, which allowed
Yep.
me to, at the same time as I was dropping these doses down, to really have some genuine visibility, not just like, oh, I feel I'm on track, but to actually have some tangible thing to keep me accountable. That also, apart from being able to just take these little snapshots of your food and your portion sizes, there was a bit of this particular app sort of has little bits in there that you can fill out about why you ate. Were you hungry? How'd you feel about it? All these
Yep.
and all these other parameters. Like your sleep and your stress and all those kind of other things that you can keep tabs on. So I was doing that at the same time. So dropping
So
down
you're
those
kind of
clicks again.
Yeah, so you're kind of reteaching yourself how to
Mm.
eat properly, I
Yeah.
guess, at the same time as
And I could
tapering
make
off.
notes about the hunger and my dose. And, I started to see some real patterns of, even though I've had a hysterectomy, I still kept my ovaries, but I could still see, even though I'm in perimenopause, I could still see there were some fluctuations that coincided with what was obviously some sort of cycle. And it gave me a bit of knowledge and power. So rather than getting very stressed about every fluctuation on the scales, I could just start to identify some real patterns,
Yep.
and feel just reassured by them, I guess, that everything was going okay. And also doing it that slowly and allowing a bit of time to sit at each dose. Some of my hunger cues did come back. I would have a few days sometimes where it felt like that food noise was maybe a bit louder, but it allowed me some time to just get a bit of control back and start to really kind of tune into it and get back in the driver's seat and not panic about it. Thankfully, I think this technique for me has worked really well because so far the maintenance and I'm not calling it a win because I know it's been 2 years now that I've been in this healthy weight range and a year without the medication, but I'm starting for probably the first time in any of this dieting that I've ever done or any ways of eating that I've ever employed. This probably is the first time I'm actually feeling confident about durable and sustainable changes that I've made.
That's great, isn't it? Would it surprise you? There's a Korean study that I took a look at that said that only 40% of people stayed on Saxenda for more than 6 months. Do you see that a lot in the forum? I know you've had a great experience with it, and it's been fantastic for you. But do you see that a lot where people will try?
No, I
Surprising
wasn't
to
aware
you?
of the study, but it doesn't particularly surprise me. I think there's sort of myriad reasons that I see people go off. Some of it is the probably first and
Cost?
foremost is the doctor's view. Here we seem to have, and it is one thing being in the groups has highlighted the arbitrary prescribing practices that we seem to have here as far as what doctors feel, particularly how long patients should be on it and when the cutoff is. It seems some doctors sort of feel it's 3 months, that's it, and you have to go on your own. Some feel it's a BMI criterion. Once you've dropped past a certain BMI, that's the end of it. Some feel it's a longer term thing, and some seem to feel it's lifelong. So I think that sort of does affect how long people stay on it. And outside of
Mhm.
that, it's some people, I think it's just another one of those things that can get quite tedious, constantly thinking about injecting and the
Yeah.
food and and the other thing is for some people the side effects never do quite they never go away completely, and they just feel like they feel like crud for a long time. They feel tired or anxious or down or just slightly off all the time, and they just don't want to feel like that anymore for the sake of losing weight. And so I have seen plenty of people go, look, it's not for me, and
Yeah.
they go off it.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that
Yeah.
too, for various reasons, and I think there seems to be a lot of doctors will just follow the dosage advice given by the manufacturer and say, "There you go and do that dosage," and that obviously that was not what you followed, and it's worked really well for you. You've gone a different way, had a lower dose, and had a great
Mm.
result.
Do you
But I don't.
find that there's interpretation? I'm not sure, like if it's a similar issue with the long acting, your Ozempics and things. I know with Saxenda, one of the BMI criterion and the time criterion. So with Saxenda, the BMI criterion is a starting weight at commencement of medication of 30 plus,
Yep,
or 27 plus if you've got other health issues that are being exacerbated by your weight,
yep.
and that may be similar. Um,
I think it's the same. I think it's the
yeah.
same.
And the
Yep.
other criterion with as far as once you're on it, and whether or not you sort of continue to stay on it, is if you haven't lost sort of 4 to 5% of your body weight after
The
12
stop
weeks
notice.
on
Yeah.
on that sort of therapeutic dose of 3 milligrams, then stop. Some doctors,
Yeah,
it seems, interpret that as you should only be on it for 3 months. That's what a lot of people are coming into these groups and saying, my doctor says you're only allowed to be on it for 3 months. And they
oh,
also seem to say, oh, my BMI dropped below 30, so my doctor won't give me it anymore because that's the BMI criterion. But it's like, I've always I keep reading all the literature and that came with it, and it definitely says sort of starting, but it does feel like a lot of doctors seem to interpret that that commencement criterion for BMI as a cutoff.
yep,
Um, but
yep. I understand what you're saying.
yeah, but that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
No, I think doctors are so short of time that they
Yes, yeah,
don't have the time to
absolutely.
and sit there and look and read a lot of this information. So they often just go by what is simple, like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
this is your dosage. And I know that with Saxenda, there is a stop notice, what you're talking about as a stop notices, which is
Mhm.
like if you haven't lost this much weight in a certain period of time, then you should go off it. Ozempic and Wegovy, they do have a stop notice, but it really varies in each country, to tell you the truth.
Mm.
So, which is really weird that you think they'd have a stop notice for every country, but that's the reason they don't, is because every country has a different medical governing body. Like for us, it's the
Yes, yeah. The
TGA. So,
FDA
and
or the
that,
TGA,
yeah,
and yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
So they all have different stop notices,
Yeah.
which is kind of crazy, I think. But anyway,
Mm.
I'm just trying to think what else I wanted to ask you. So you've lost the weight, you've managed to get off it,
Mm.
which is great. You're feeling good. Have you spoken to many of the men that have? Are there many men that you know that have been on Saxenda?
I mean, none. Oh, sorry, that's not true. I do know one personally who went on it for weight issues, and he's doing really well. That's actually a friend of my husband's. He's doing great. Obviously, in the group, there are a spattering of men, and I love that they're there, and I sort of there's a couple that are quite active, but a lot of them. Um, the women do tend to dominate the talk in
Yeah,
there. I
yeah,
don't know whether I think part of it is obviously women than men do utilize the
that's
medication.
right. Yeah,
And
they
I
do.
think women are just probably more likely sometimes to use these sort of groups for support as well.
Support.
So and also, I think sometimes the women forget that the men are there because they all start their posts with "Hey, ladies," and some of the men are like "Hello," so they kind of the women talk a lot in very sort of female centric terms and forget sometimes that there's a few guys in there that you know, and so much of the talk in the groups too is related to our hormones and how those are related to our weight loss sort of challenges that I think some of the men sort of, we forget that they're there and they've got their own sort of sets of challenges that come along with it. But
Have you noticed, did you notice any, while you were taking this drug, any anxiety, or did you notice, did you feel like your heart rate was going faster? Because that is a known side effect of taking GLP, that your rate will increase. Did you notice anything like
initially
that?
I did. So I have the anxiety. No, I have had, I think, a dream run with this medication because I have had issues with anxiety and had been all through my sort of 20s and 30s prescribed myriad different anti-anxiety and antidepressant medication. So I was worried about that because I did sort of read obviously some of the when to stop the medication side effects. So I was
Mhm.
monitoring myself and mine improved. It was awesome. So
That's
I
great.
actually found less brain fog. I found less anxiety. I felt really, really, really good on it. So I didn't have those sort of issues, but I know it does plague some people
Some
though.
people. Yep.
Um,
I'm just wondering what your take is on this. When they were doing the clinical trials for Saxenda for weight loss, they generally put the clinical trial participants on diets and cut their calories, and
mhm.
asked them to exercise, and and sometimes gave them a like a therapist sort of to help them along. What do you think about that? Do you think they should have just left the people to do what they're going to do, or do you think they should have had all that level of support in a clinical trial setting?
I think potentially both. I mean, I think the clinical trial probably should have run two concurrent things if they didn't,
Yeah.
where they had these
That's
groups of people that they had offered all this support to,
yeah.
and compared those outcomes to, we'll just see because most people may not necessarily have access to that. I mean, some do, and there's, if you can get a dietitian and all those things to sort of help support your journey, then great. But a lot of people are not doing that. And that would have actually been an interesting comparison to make. So to see and to see where these people, both sets of people, are in their journey. Say 12 months, 2 years down the track as far as the maintenance, because the loss is really the kind of simplest part of the whole thing, and it doesn't mean much if it doesn't stay off. So it would be interesting to see.
In the clinical trials, it was fairly common to see adverse events, in other words, side effects, hitting 88% of the trial participants. What do you think of that? I mean, you've obviously had a great run. 88% is a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of genuine adverse reactions, I mean, it's going to be a sliding scale of side effects. Some of them are, going to be things that are manageable or transient, or, just that you can sort of live with. And then there are going to be those people that have obviously genuine, really problematic adverse events. And I'm not discounting those at all. I think this is a medication, and it isn't. It's not a supplement. It's not. It's not a vitamin or anything like that. It is a serious medication, and I think people need to be under no illusion that. And it does worry me a lot, I've got to say, Bernadette, when the rise of the subscription-based dispensing of these medications always gave me a flutter of nervousness, because I know that and I'm not talking about any particular one, and I'm not going to bag them, because obviously, they have to, meet all their own checks and balances and answer to the governing bodies that they do. But I know personally of plenty of people that use them, and while a lot of these things say that they have processes in place as far as checking that that the right people are going on this medication, and that they have the ability to have those sort of more in-depth consults. Nobody that I knew was actually, it was all pretty much done with questionnaires and brief sort of checks. And I do wonder how thorough a medical check is going to be under those circumstances. It does worry me a lot.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think that's there really needs to be some really strong regulations in terms of that.
And so when you're talking about these adverse reactions, it is one of those things that I worry too, and it's another thing you sort of see within the support groups, that people are so desperate for this to work. I mean, I went into it with a bit of a, look, I'm just going to try this. I don't actually have high hopes, and it's a bit of a Hail Mary. I'll give it a go and see what happens. And I was very lucky and it worked really well. But I know that there are some people out there that are so desperate. And if the numbers are going down on the scales and the weight is coming off, but they're feeling like crap,
terrible,
and there's some really worrying side effects, pain, abdominal pain, or things. There are some people in the groups that they just keep pushing through it, and it's not meant to be misery inducing. I think some people are really reluctant to go to their doctor and tell them, because they don't want their doctor to say this medication isn't
not for you. Yeah.
Because it has. And that all sort of, I guess, ties into our, our views of ourselves and our views about our weight and
that's
all of those
true.
kind of things.
Can I just go back to one thing that you spoke about earlier, which I find really interesting? And you know how we were talking about the food noises, and when those food noises get turned off, it could possibly lead to, I guess it depends on the person, but some sort of a mental health crisis in terms of like, oh my God, I'm not thinking about food, and what else am I thinking about? Maybe
I think it definitely it can be disconcerting, and it was. I wasn't sure. It was so weird. Like, why is my head silent? Like, hello, and it, if you've really developed some some almost like addiction type behaviors with food, I guess having that sort of thing happen. And I've seen it mentioned in the bariatric community as well, where there's this sort of concept of transfer addiction, sometimes to other things, not always food, but other activities, because you're just not sure what to do with
Yeah.
yourself when that
When
sort of
it's gone, when it's
food thing
quite,
is gone. Yeah, when that
yeah.
has become such a big part of your life. I think for me, I was lucky in as much as this sort of came on after my hysterectomy. And while I spent a few years in a large body, I know there are lots of people out there who've spent their whole life in a bigger body, and these kind of problems have been there for them for so long that, you know, I think it is a much more entrenched issue, and it might cause them sort of more of an issue mentally to leave it behind, or, you know, it might be harder to leave behind. I
Yeah.
can't sort of speak for everyone, but,
I
you
wonder
know,
if there should be some kind of a warning or a note, you know, or something attached to the, you know, the paraphernalia that you get with these drugs that could possibly address that. I wonder if
what I
there's
would love
something.
to see, Bernadette, and I've mentioned this in the groups, and, you know, and this is, again, it's not bagging doctors, but it's acknowledging their limitations, particularly GPs, who really
Yeah.
do, I think, want the best for their patients when they're prescribing these. But as you mentioned before, they're very time poor. I mean, I think the average consult in Australia is about 11 minutes, and that's not a huge amount of time to really explain to a doctor how you're feeling, what your challenges around, you know, lifestyle, food, health and weight are, get this medication, for them to explain to you what you can expect. It would be so great. And I know this is literally a bit sort of wishful thinking, and it costs money, but a lot of GPs do have clinic nurses, and it would be so great to see in some of these GP clinics, maybe a clinic nurse really trained up in support as well, like the medication. So
Yeah.
when your doctor prescribes it to you, they can sort of hand you over, and you can get maybe sort of a half an hour add-on appointment with someone who gets this sort of training about talking about what to expect with food noise, with maybe some of the dietary
Side
changes you
effects.
might need to make, you know, what the side effects are. Because a lot of people, I think, are using these support groups as almost sort of surrogate medical advice sometimes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the risks there are, you know, you're going to get some great advice, but you're also just going to get a lot of anecdotes of people of what's worked for them. And some of it is, you know, is toe curling, some of the advice that I've
Yeah.
seen, like, oh God, please don't do that.
Okay. Just last question, Lorrie. What do you think of the price of all of these GLP-1s? How affordable do you think it
I
is for the
think
average
it's
person?
reflective of the old fat tax that they like to put on things. I mean, you know, it's not particularly affordable. And, you know, I think sometimes the pricing, look, I don't know what goes into every bit of medical pricing when it comes to things, but, you know, obviously when it's prescribed for one thing, you know, there is that sort of PBS support. And I know that the government can't carry everything, but they are so very expensive. And I think there's so much money to be made when it comes to weight loss. The industry itself, it is a multi-billion-dollar industry worldwide. So I think it's depressing. I think it's demoralizing. But, you know, I think it's unsurprising.
Yeah, I guess considering the drug companies are, you know,
Yes.
they're a business, so
Yes.
they're
Well, of
trying to
course they
make.
are. Absolutely. You know, and I think I sort of feel sometimes some of the dosing recommendations as well you know, are more about that money sometimes as well, and less about actual health and things, because sometimes I think, when you kind of, there's no other option that you're given except to just, push through that sort of titration schedule and get to that 3 milligrams no matter what. I mean, some people are, feeling absolutely wretched, and it's not really good for them. But, obviously they, it is that ultimately, if you do stick to that schedule, then it is more money that is potentially made by the companies that make the medication.
Yeah, and there isn't a clear exit either. There's not a clear exit door of saying how to get off the medication.
Yeah, and that's a definite thing that I've seen in the groups. I mean, and it is probably the biggest advice that I always give people that come into the group that are just starting is like, people, have you got any tips for me? And I'm like, if you're just starting, you really need to check with your doctor what their views on the prescribing of this medication is, because so many people they're getting great results and they're going to their doctor to get that next script filled, and their doctor says, no, you can't have any more. You've been on it for 12 weeks, or you've reached your 30, BMI or whatever it is, and they're left then scriptless but unprepared, and they have nothing in their toolbox. They just don't know what to do, and they're quite panicky, and they sort of come to the group going, I'm not really sure what to do. It's very hard to find another doctor, I think, under those circumstances to prescribe it for you. And then there is no exit plan. There's sort of, and inevitably a lot of them are, the weight just comes back on and they're just feeling even more demoralized than before they started. So making sure, I think, that you know what your doctor's views are from the jump, because at least then, if you agree with those views that, okay, I'm only going to be on it for 12 weeks or until my BMI is 30 or whatever it is, then you're prepared and you can start, kind of mentally preparing yourself for a post-injection life. But, if you don't agree, if those views don't align with what you want, then at least then you've got the option of going, look, I might actually find another healthcare provider that I can work with that might be more aligned with my views.
Yeah. That's great. Thanks, Lorrie. Can I ask you, last question? I don't know if you're happy to say this. Are you happy to tell me your age and how much you lost in total?
47 when I started. I'm 49 now, and I lost 40 kilograms.
Wow.
I mean, all I know is my high blood pressure normalized, my cholesterol returned to normal. I've got non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and my liver enzymes normalized. I take no more regular opiates or painkillers or anything like that. And, it's been pretty life-changing for me in a positive way.
Thanks, Lorrie. That was a really thorough and I feel like a really great look into Saxenda. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the lawsuits regarding Victoza and Saxenda in the USA. So Novo Nordisk in 2017 agreed to pay $58 million for failure to comply with FDA mandated risk program. That's a huge settlement. The US attorney said that Novo Nordisk's actions unnecessarily put vulnerable patients at risk, and said that Novo Nordisk sales representatives misled physicians by failing to accurately disclose a potential life-threatening side effect of a prescription drug, and they needlessly increased risk to patients being treated with this drug. The potential risk was in humans of a rare form of cancer called medullary thyroid carcinoma, MTC, which is associated with the drug. Novo Nordisk were required to provide information regarding Victoza's potential risk of MTC to physicians. And the manufacturer supposedly failed to comply with that requirement. There were several lawsuits that were brought by whistleblowers within Novo Nordisk. Now, there are also ongoing lawsuits in the US in regard to Saxenda and Victoza, and it's got to do with gastric issues. Some of the lawsuits allege that Novo Nordisk failed to warn of adverse side effects related to the long-term use of the drug, including the potential risk for gastroparesis. Gastroparesis is when your stomach kind of seizes up. A woman from Kentucky filed a lawsuit claiming that the company failed to warn that its weight loss drug Saxenda could cause incurable stomach paralysis. The woman used Saxenda from March 2019 to April 2021 and now suffers from gastroparesis. So the lawsuit alleges that since the drug's approval by the FDA, Novo Nordisk has marketed Saxenda for weight loss without adequately warning about these risks, despite clinical studies indicating such risks. And I don't know if you remember, but yes, we talked a lot about the gastric adverse events that were found. I think there are hundreds of these lawsuits already in the USA. Time will tell what happens with those. Next week, we dive headfirst into the Ozempic clinical trials. We look at the side effects, dosages, and ask why did senior Danish scientists publish written objections to semaglutide being used as a standalone weight loss drug. All this and more next week on Investigating Ozempic. Hey, I'm not a medical doctor, and none of this information should be construed as medical advice. Please read the show notes for the full medical disclaimer. Investigating Ozempic is written and produced by me, Bernadette Fisher. And don't forget to rate, follow, and subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks.